In the Mossi Kingdom of West Africa, the man who puts the king in power is not a nobleman. He's a commoner. There's a ceremony, and in that ceremony, one man hands the king his authority. That man comes from an ordinary family, and Diop says he does it on behalf of the free men of the kingdom. Hold that picture for a second, because it's the reverse of what most of us were handed. And it gets stranger. The official who guards the royal treasury, the one they call the Ras Sam Naba, is a slave of the crown. He is the kingdom's minister of finance, and he gives orders to free men. So, a slave runs the money. A commoner makes the king. That's one of the places where Cheikh Anta Diop's case bites hardest. In a book called Precolonial Black Africa, in Harold Salamson's 1987 translation. And here's why it matters. Not just that it happened, but that it cracks the story we inherit. In that story, an African kingdom is always a strong man with a spear. It is never a constitution with a treasury. So, the question: were the states of pre-colonial Black Africa real constitutional orders with genuine limits on their kings? And if they were, who actually held the power inside them? The only way to find out is to walk the machinery ourselves. The crown, the ministers, the treasury, the army, the courts, and then the hardest question, which is who built it? Start with the ceremony that puts a king in office. Historians call it investiture, and it just means the formal act of handing someone their authority. Now, a ruler who comes out of the ruling family sounds like exactly the strong man we were promised. And yes, the Mossi king, the Moro Naba, does come from that family. But watch what Diop does with the details. Getting the throne isn't automatic. The king is chosen by a council of 4 senior men, headed by a kind of prime minister. Only after they choose him is he invested. And the man who performs that act is deliberately not one of the Mossi nobles, the class Diop calls the na-komse. Here's how Diop puts it. Diop wrote, quote, "is not a na-komse, nobleman, but comes from an ordinary family, and who is, in reality, the representative of the people, of all free men," end quote. 2 things are packed in there, and I want to pull them apart, because they are not the same kind of claim. The fact is narrow. A commoner, not a noble, performs the act. The reading is the bigger claim. That phrase, the representative of the people, is Diop telling us what the ritual means. That the king's authority runs up to him from the free men, instead of down to him from his bloodline. The fact is on the page. The reading is Diop's interpretation of it. And you're already reaching for the obvious objection. A ceremony can be pure theater. It can be stagecraft that changes nothing about who really runs things. That's fair. It's the strongest thing you can say against Diop here, so let's not wave it off. His answer is that the ceremony doesn't stand on its own. It sits on top of an arrangement we're about to see. One where a minister, once he's placed in office, cannot be fired by the king. So hold that objection in your back pocket. We'll come back to it. But notice this much already. The reflex that hears African kingship and pictures one big man is a reflex worth catching in the act before we decide to trust it. Now go from the throne to the treasury. This is where it stops being ceremony and gets uncomfortable in a genuinely interesting way. The Ras Sam Naba is the man guarding the royal treasury, which held cowrie shells and bracelets, the money of the place. He was the head of the crown's own slaves, drawn from a single slave family. He was also the minister of finance, and the high executioner, and the head of the blacksmiths, all at once, all in one man. And Diop states the paradox flat. Diop wrote, quote, "Therefore, although himself a slave, The Rasam Naba rules over free men and holds power over full-fledged citizens. End quote. Read that slowly, because it inverts the thing you expect. A man who is a slave holds a great office of state and gives orders to citizens who are legally free. And there's a discomfort in that Diop doesn't linger on. A man who is himself owned, holding the office of executioner, giving orders to free men. To a modern ear, that is coercion, however you frame it, and calling it a constitution doesn't dissolve it. Diop's book first appeared in 1960, and you can feel the argument leaning toward the generous reading of what he found. Because the same fact cuts two ways. You can read a slave who runs the treasury as a state spreading power across every class. Or you can read it the other way. The argument would go like this. A shrewd king puts the money and the executioner's blade in the hands of a man drawn from a family that owns nothing and can never found a rival line. Give the job to someone who can never use it against you. That second reading isn't power shared, it's power concentrated, and I'm not going to pretend it away. Here's the one thing that keeps the generous reading breathing. These ministers, once they are placed in office, are beyond the king's power to remove. But I keep turning that over because it cuts both ways too. An office a ruler can't clear out can lock his own system in place just as easily as it can hold him back. So we're not going to settle it here. We'll hold both readings and let the machinery tell us what it can. So, back to that objection we pocketed. A ceremony can be theater. A slave minister can be argued both ways. So look at the parts of a state that are harder to wave off. The parts you can count. And here I have to keep two things apart that are easy to blur because they come from different places. First, the checks on the ruler, and those sit in the Mossi court. Diop wrote, quote, "The non-absolute nature of the monarchy is revealed by the fact that, once invested, the ministers cannot be removed by the king." End quote. Non-absolute is the key word there. It means the king's power has a hard edge to it. And this is where the edge is. A minister, once he's in, is past the king's reach to fire. And the limits run higher than the ministers. Diop wrote, quote, "Among the Mossi, the keeper of the sand confirmed everyone in his respective office, including the king." End quote. The keeper of the sand was a ritual officer, and confirming someone meant performing the rite that made their hold on the office good. What that line documents is confirmation, not a power to refuse. Diop doesn't claim the man could turn a king down, but in Diop's reading, the ritual says the office stands above the person holding it, even when that person is the king. Then there's Cayor, a Wolof kingdom on the Atlantic coast of what's now Senegal. There, Diop describes something harder than ritual. The prime minister, called the Jarraf, could start the formal process of removing a king who had stopped ruling well. In Diop's account, this Jarraf made and unmade the Damels, which was the title for the kings of Cayor. So that's the first thing, the checks. Now the second thing, which is the paperwork of government, and it lives in a different world. The empires that took on Islam, Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Bakri, a medieval geographer, put Ghana's fighting strength at 200,000 men, with 40,000 archers among them. There was a graduated customs tariff, meaning the rate changed with the direction of travel. 1 gold dinar on a mule load of salt coming into the country, 2 on a load going out. There was the Quran, adopted as the civil law, and it was applied in 2 kinds of court, the king's and that of the Qadi, a judge working from Islamic law. And there was a standing army with armored knights, cavalry, and a river flotilla, a fleet of boats. It was Songhai's ruler, Askia Muhammad, who turned that army into a permanent force rather than something raised when war came. So keep the two apart. The checks on the ruler come from kingdoms like the Mossi and Cayor. The tariff, the courts, and the war fleet come from the great empires. And here's the honest catch. A tariff and a fleet prove a state could tax and could fight. They can't tell you whether the slave minister was holding the king back or working for him. The machinery proves the state was real. It doesn't tell you who it served. So if the apparatus is this real, the next question shows up on its own. Whose achievement was it? The view Diop is arguing against is that the order came from outside, that it was Islam and the Arab world that brought the administration and the law, and that the African part was mostly to receive them. That is the claim Diop's argument is built to break, and the passage says it flat. Diop wrote, quote, Islam in Black Africa merely superimposed itself on the politico-administrative organization, end quote. Politico-administrative organization is a heavy phrase for a simple thing: the working machinery of government, the offices and the rules. And superimposed means laid on top of. So the claim is that Islam settled on top of a government that was already running. That's Diop's thesis, not a settled fact, and you should hear it as an argument he is making. His contrast is this. Diop argues that Christianity gave the West its administrative organization, the machinery of government, and carried its historical memory forward. In Black Africa, he says, Islam did not build the structure because the structure was already standing when it arrived. And the proof he offers is small and quietly pointed. When a foreigner, an Arab or otherwise, was given a post by the African ruler, he didn't bring a new job title with him. He took on the local one, the name that office already had. By itself, that only shows one thing. This particular office existed before this particular appointee. Diop reaches past that to a bigger claim, that the offices weren't invented by the outsiders who came to fill them. That's the sense in which, for Diop, the state came first. And if that's right, the credit for the African state runs to Africans. That's the most satisfying claim in the book. It's also the most exposed. And I want to say why before we close, because the honest version of this argument has to carry its own weakness in the same hand. So, in answer, the bounded kind, the kind you can actually test. In the state's Diop documents, there are institutional constraints, and he lays them out in detail. In the Mossi court, ministers the king cannot remove. In Cayor, a prime minister who could move to depose him. Set beside those in the great empires is the apparatus of a working state, a tariff, a standing army, a legal code applied in courts. That is not the picture of a strong man with a spear. But how often those limits actually held, and how well they held against a king who pushed, Diop's account doesn't give us the cases to say. And here's the turn, against the easiest way to hear all of this. The comfortable reading is that this is a feel-good correction. Africa had kings too, and empires too, so put it on a poster and move on. That reading is a trap, and the trap is baited with Diop's own evidence. Because the very same slave minister, who looks like power shared, is also the sharpest sign of the opposite, that a king could gather the money and the blade into the hands of a man with no line of his own to build on. The dignity and the doubt live inside the very same fact, and the poster keeps only the dignity. So here's where I'll plant my feet, and you're free to plant yours somewhere else. If Diop is right, the kingdoms he documents built their own limits on power, and Islam only ever settled on top of a state that Africans had already made. But if the slave minister was the king's instrument, rather than the limit he looks like, then the checks were softer than they seem. The offices and the rules are documented in Diop's account, and they are not nothing. What they meant is the better argument, and I'd rather have that argument than the myth it replaces. Diop gives us something close to a last word, and I'll let him have it. Diop wrote, quote, "Africans thus never experienced a lay republic, even though the regimes were almost everywhere democratic, with a balance of powers." End quote. Lay there means secular, a state without a sacred throne at the center. So he is denying Africa a republic without a throne, while insisting its thrones were balanced and answerable. Whether that balance was real or whether it was the most elegant cover a king ever wore, is the argument worth having.